My name is Danae, and Pastor Mike asked if I would share my story with everyone. So again, my husband is Tim Dillo, and I have 3 boys, Camden, Lane, and Keegan. But one thing a lot do not know is that I also have a daughter. Her name is Kinley. I was at a really small private Christian school in Warrenton, and we only had 5 kids in my graduating class. I walked away with a killer resume. I was class president, valedictorian, and homecoming queen. So I did it all. But again, it was a really small group. I got involved in a relationship that senior year, and right from the get-go, it was not a healthy relationship. I found myself pulling away from my family, pulling away from my core values, and I knew I was not a good version of myself that year. I ended up making a lot of decisions, and decisions that had a lifetime effect. One being I got pregnant senior year, and I actually gave that valedictorian speech while I was pregnant with a little girl. I knew what I had growing up. I had an amazing family. Larry and Martha are my parents. They always set a great example of what it looks like to follow Christ. And I wanted parents like that for my child. It was actually my mom that brought up the idea of adoption. And I was open. I knew I didn't want to mess this up. This was too important. It was a child. So we stepped back. We spoke with an adoption agency, and that's when I met Bethany Christian Services in St. Louis. Next thing I knew, I was given books of families and parents that were desperately wanting to adopt, that were wanting a child. So I was going through these books, and immediately there's one couple that stood out above all the rest. It was Andy and Brandy. So in order for adoption to happen, there's a lot of things that have to line up. So first off, both parents have to sign over their paternity, which sounds simple. So I agreed to adoption, but her father was not really on the same page I was. He did not sign until 2 weeks before she was born. Another thing is, you rely on the court. If you are in an agency, you have to wait for a court date, and then there's the adoption ceremony. It was a plea to God that he would somehow line everything up. Do you know that my case, it was the fastest case in Bethany history. We signed the papers. I was able to get induced so I can make a court date. And after I gave birth, I went home. I think it was 1 or 2 nights later. I went home for one evening, and I woke up the next morning. I had a court date, and then I went straight to the adoption ceremony. God moved mountains for me. He heard my prayer, and he did what I didn't think was possible. A few weeks later, I ended up going off to college. I went to Mid-America in Olathe, Kansas, and during that time, I think I was just kind of going through the motions. I went through a lot of negative thoughts during that time, but again, I just kind of pushed through it. And maybe 6-9 months later, I ended up meeting Tim Dillo. And We immediately just hit it off. We became best friends right away. And it felt really, really good to be in a relationship. I ended up finding myself putting more focus on this relationship rather than God, and now allowing God to provide the true healing. So once again, I found myself pregnant. I was at college. He was a pastor's child, and it was a new low for me. I know it was hard for him. It was hard for his family. And I was really, really disappointed. You know, Danae, how could you do this? After what you've been through, how could you let this happen? We ended up moving back home to Troy, close to my parents. And we went to my brother's track meet. Darren was there, and our pastor, Michael Davis, was there. And we ran into his father, Brian, and he gave us an offer that we couldn't refuse. He said, the church has Krispy Kreme donuts, and we went the next Sunday. So Tim and I, we walked in. I was pregnant. We were not married. And this family, not this family, well, they did become family. This church family just opened their arms to us and loved on us and gave us everything we needed during that time. We started 40 Days of Purpose that first Sunday, and that was our church home. So here we are. Tim and I have been married. It will be 20 years next week. We have 3 boys, Camden, Lane, and Keegan. And we've been a part of that church until it became Anchored Hope here in Troy. All throughout the years, I would send her a letter. I would send her pictures. And it was a partially open, partially closed adoption, which meant we would forward everything to the agency, and the agency would then forward it to the other party. Again, every year I would get a letter back, and I watched Kinley grow through these letters and through these pictures. And it, not that we planned it that way, it's just what worked for us. So again, I did not know where they were, and I was in Carthage with my in-laws. We were visiting them for the weekend, and we went out for lunch, and I'm in this buffet line getting food, and I just glance over. There's Andy, Brandy, and 2 little girls standing at the entrance of this restaurant. Pretty sure my heart stopped. I looked like I saw a ghost, you know, trying to process what had just happened. And part of me felt like I was in trouble because I wasn't supposed to know where they were. So I just went back to my seat and pretended nothing happened. Was totally done eating at that point, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and it was Andy and Brandy. Kinley was in the car. She was a little girl, probably terrified, because we were all terrified. You know, none of us were prepared for this moment. But we hugged, we cried, we briefly talked. But in that moment, God put us together, just face to face, seeing each other. It was incredible. And it got us ready. It got our hearts ready for the next step. So a couple years later, I got a letter from the agency, and Kinley was ready to meet me. She was 15. So we were gonna meet in Columbia, and my sister, she's gonna drive me there. So we park. I'm getting ready to go out and meet my daughter for the first time. And I was terrified. I was beyond excited, but probably about a couple weeks prior to that, just the anxiety of the unknown. You know, you're your worst enemy sometime. And I was questioning, what if I cry too much and I scare her? What if I don't cry enough? Will she think that I don't care about her? I was just afraid I was gonna mess it up. So we're in the car, and my sister, she prayed over me. And I'm a bottle of nerves, and something amazing happened. It was like a wave of something came over me, and it was at the top of my head, and it just slowly trickled down my body. And there was instant calmness, peace. I felt still, and there was a rare confidence. And God healed me in that moment. He gave me everything that I needed, and I met her, and it was amazing. And I knew that God, He gave her everything that I desperately wanted for her. She had a loving family. And here she is now. She's 22. I saw her last over Super Bowl weekend, and this last year, she graduated from college. She's an ICU nurse. She has her own house. She just got a dog. She's rocking it. She's doing so good, and I'm so proud of her. But I'm proud of who she is. She's the most loving and kind person. She gives of herself. She puts others before herself. She's just good. So you might wonder, you know, a lot of you probably cannot relate to my story of adoption, but just going over everything, I know that I was never alone. Kinley has never been alone. God has been with us this whole time, working behind the scenes, and He's a good Father that cares. And trusting Him was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I mean, really, like, my best moments, God has been with me. He's always provided. He's present. He's alive. And I just know whatever days I have ahead, there's so much comfort in knowing that I don't have to do it alone. And He's always there. Because again, He's a good Father.